Well, that one. Well, this one. Then I'm just going to clap for that. Sing.
So anyway, I suppose you just had a joint and started again.
Yeah, we had to do it again.
Let me just find my goodies here. Alright. Amazing, everybody ready?
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. No, I'm singing it.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Now, a few months ago, the team behind Newsroom started what has now become known as the so-called Dagga debate, asking the question, should marijuana be legalized here in South Africa? We were approached firstly by the concerned youth of Southern Africa who wanted to go head-to-head with marijuana lobby group Below the Line, and what followed was a debate that spread like wildfire on all social media sites, went global really. Since then, we've been approached by numerous lobby groups, concerned doctors and experts who all wanted to have their say on the matter. After having them all on the show, we've decided it was now time for it to take a political turn and invite some of our country's most influential political parties to come and have their say. Starting today with Jeremy Acton, the leader of the Dagga Party of South Africa, we thought it would only be apt to start with the Dagga Party. Good morning, Jeremy. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben. Thank you.
Jeremy, tell us about your engagement as the Dagga Party, firstly, with other political parties and how they've responded to this question.
Well, one of our members who's actually been on your show before, Mr. William Wallace from Below the Line, who's a supporter of the party, wrote to Mrs. Ziller to inquire about the DA standpoint on Dagga and gave motivations for legalization and asked for a public reply, and we got a deafening silence. So the Dagga culture of South Africa is wondering what the DA position is. And then Mr. Mark Wiley, community safety spokesman for the DA in the Western Cape, recently has been taken to court by a Rastafarian grouping for equating Dagga use with criminals and especially linking the Rastafarian community with criminal behavior.
So that's a case that's pending. So the engagement with some of the political parties have not been good. In this case, you say that the DA, who are often seen to be taking issues or taking a stand on issues, they have no position on this. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct. And if I may go on to the ANC, well, it's well written down in the history and research that the struggle movement used cannabis cultivation in the homelands to fund the struggle, and they used friendly white persons who would transport the cannabis to the urban centers of South Africa to raise the money. But it's very strange that the ANC then, as the struggle movement suddenly turned around on its own growers when it came into power and used the same apartheid helicopters, police and dogs against those people who had supported them in the deep homelands. So the ANC's position on cannabis is very clear over the last 14, 15 years.
Let's talk about the country. Is South Africa ready to legalize marijuana? Is Parliament ready to take this step?
Well, firstly, I think a state mechanism like Parliament, which has presided over the prohibition for literally the last 100 years, is not necessarily the most competent organization to write legislation on Dagga. It should come from the Dagga culture and from public consultation. I also think that the government is going to be very unwilling to legalize, because our government is controlled behind the scenes by various corporations and money elites who don't want to see cannabis legal. The reason why it is kept illegal is not because it's a dangerous drug that we must be protected from by means of criminalization, which is a harm in itself. Cannabis is actually an industrial and medical resource. Cannabis provides the most nutritious protein seed on earth, a very useful seed oil. It provides the longest and strongest fiber on earth from a plant. All the sails of the British Navy were made from cannabis. And then once we have extracted the fibers from the stalks of the plant, we're left with a thing called herds, which is like a cellulose material. And we can make petrol and methanol and methane, in other words, energy, from the waste products that come from the inside of the sticks of Dagga. And that is one of the most important reasons why Dagga was originally made illegal by those corporations that were behind the British Crown in South Africa, and also the American federal government in the 1930s.
What about public sentiment?
We could actually...
What about public sentiment? Where are we now with public sentiment, and what do you think? Is it not maybe time for something like a referendum to be put forward and for the people of South Africa to decide on this matter?
Well, I'm a bit concerned that a referendum would be held along party political lines, and those parties that don't support Dagga will require their members to vote against such an issue. But remember, we are a cultural minority. The Dagga culture is a very organized and legitimate cultural minority, and we're claiming our rights, regardless of whether the rest of South Africa accepts it or not. I think that we have to legalize Dagga. It's not a matter of whether we should or we shouldn't. Firstly, recognizing that the propaganda against this plant is there for the vested interests. If we look at the future of our economy, we have a massive unemployment issue. 50% of South Africans go to bed hungry. And we have this resource which will enable us all to participate equitably in a production economy. And when I also say a production, instead of just being a consumer, South Africans could be growing petrol. We could reduce the price of petrol in South Africa. We could reduce crimes related to poverty. In countries which have legalized for various reasons, recreational and medical, they noticed that the suicide rate came down. So did traffic accidents. So did domestic and violence and violent crimes. We need those statistics in South Africa. So we have to actually consider that it's not about believing that it's going to be dangerous to our future. It's actually going to be a very big help for a more sustainable South Africa.
Jeremy, finally, we have all the political parties coming in the rest of the week. Now, you say that they've been silent and they've been very difficult for you to interact with them. What are the questions that you want to ask these political parties? We've got the DA confirmed for Wednesday. Do you have a specific question to ask them?
They must provide information about why they think it is illegal, and then they must also explain why we can't use this resource for the various industrial benefits which will accrue to our economy. It would have a massive multiplier effect on the economic situation in South Africa, and legalizing cannabis in the Karoo areas would mean that we don't actually have to frack the Karoo for natural gas. Our farmers could farm gas. As regards the ANC, I just hope that they would hear the pleas of their own voters who use cannabis. This is something that is going to be of great help to South Africa, and on the medical side as well, we should be seeing it in all hospitals for all the ailments that cannabis can treat. And then on the other hand, all citizens should be equitably allowed to participate in a cannabis economy. And equitable production of cannabis means equitable access to land in South Africa, which is something that the political parties make a lot of hot air about. But I don't see the change when it comes to land access. We're sitting in ghettos with prohibition. Well, let's rather move young South Africans out into the rural areas and give them this resource to create a future.
Jeremy Acton of the Dagga Party of South Africa, thank you for joining us today. This as we continue our Dagga debate.
Amazing. Cool. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us once again. We're very honored and privileged to be here today. It's Cannabis Cup time in Plettenberg Bay again. We got one of the legends sitting here with us, Jeremy Acton. Thank you for coming on. Sure. And that everybody in the cannabis space knows the extent that you guys went to with the Concord ruling and everything like that.
In the Western Cape, we've been very successful applying to the High Court for individuals who've been arrested to apply for a stay of prosecution and in order to summons the state to justify the law. So we provide the papers for this. You personalize them with your own personal contact information and that. And then we show people how to serve their papers and how to do the follow-up documentation. And then we facilitate when they actually appear in court in person. And so far we've had about 11 successes on these papers. And the door is now open for anyone to claim equal rights to those who've already been granted the stay of application, a stay of prosecution. And so Section 9 equality before the law applies now. And so we've got quite a lot of people coming in. We're a bit overloaded at the moment, but everyone is helped to do it yourself. And it's now getting to be groups that go and serve papers. And then the other challenge at the moment is writing our argument against the state's reasons for not legalizing. And I can assure you that they have no scientific basis in those legal papers of theirs. Oh, did you know? This is so fake, but Dagga is more dangerous than alcohol or tobacco, which is absolutely not true, and yet they've put that in their documentation. And we're going to just obviously hammer that back with all the facts, literally in deaths and the impact of alcohol in society just by the drinking and driving side of things, let alone the domestic violence. We have no fatalities in the Dagga culture from overdose. It's a very healthy, the more you actually use, the healthier you will be in the long run. Okay? As long as you are motivated and positive and care about people and take care of the other aspects of your life. Okay? So that's what's happening now, and the time is coming for us to have a province-wide stay of all prosecutions, blanket stay of prosecutions, because they're wasting our time and we're wasting the court's time with these individual applications. And there's enough reason now in the Western Cape for it to be stopped, prosecutions to be held over until the big constitutional court cases are finalized and the decisions come from there. At the moment, the Medical Innovations Bill is in Parliament. And although the Dagga Party supports the concept of medical innovations, we want to warn that this bill is hopelessly inadequate to legalise cannabis and regulate it and ensure that benefits are provided to the people. So we would like all the mention of cannabis in the Medical Innovations Bill to be deleted. And cannabis can still be part of the Medical Innovations program, but it must not be specifically mentioned in the bill. I want to just mention that our government has always prosecuted cannabis. And the reason they do that is to protect the profits of various corporations that actually control them behind the scenes. In particular, the pharmaceutical industry and the fossil carbon industry. That's the diesel and the petrol. Now, they're going to be very reluctant to legalize cannabis for us to have access to that medical resource in our backyards. It's going to be only aimed to provide it to the pharmaceutical companies so that we will buy it from them, and that's not acceptable. So we demand our medical rights, which entail the right to grow cannabis in our gardens and process it according to our needs and our knowledge. And the excess that we produce will be then donated to a cooperative that should ideally be formed in every community to regulate and manage legal cannabis. And so we can't appeal to this government to actually legalize for us in the way we want to. We've got to somehow start taking political action and gaining control of political structures in order to make our legalization for the people and not for outside corporations with shareholders who would gain the benefits thereof. And this must be a people's initiative, and it must ultimately only benefit the people. Once it's benefited us, we will sell it to the state and the corporations.
Welcome back and thank you so much for joining us. We will be having quite a lot of heavy content this morning. We spoke about Oscar Pistorius, we just spoke about climate change. We're going to politics. We're going to be speaking about the Dagga Party. Now, the Dagga Party applied this week to the High Court in Cape Town and Pretoria for cannabis to be legalized. As they say, this could give the country's economy a multi-billion rand boost. According to the Dagga Party, the legislation of cannabis in designated restaurants and bars will attract more tourists to the country. The party wants that sections of the Drug and Drug Trafficking Act as well as the Medicines and Related Substance Act to be amended so that cannabis can be used for medical purposes, as this plant, according to the party, can be used in the treatment of different ailments.
All right, welcome back, everybody. This is where we talk Dagga. Last week, the Western Cape High Court ruled on a landmark case that will allow users of cannabis to legally cultivate and use it in their homes. The 66-page joint judgment of a full bench of the court, penned by Judge Dennis Davis, was welcomed by the Dagga Party and two other applicants. But to talk a little bit more about what this judgment means, we are joined from our Cape Town studio by Jeremy David Acton. Jeremy, you were one of the applicants that, being from the Dagga Party, that, you know, wants the legalization of Dagga. I imagine this is, in a way, a victory for you. Just talk to us as to why you feel and in the beginning felt that it should be legalized.
When I first started using cannabis in meditation when I was about 25 years old, I was looking into the internet to try and understand what the harms were that I was facing. And for a while I could only see the harms of prohibition in my society around me, how it was affecting my fellow citizens. Then the internet came along, and in around about 2005 I had access to the internet properly, and I started researching what harms cannabis was doing to me. And the more I researched, the more into the history, the more I realized that all of the propaganda around cannabis is false propaganda that was propagated by governments for the benefits of corporations who profit from the prohibition. So it immediately became a justice issue. And then in 2011, I got arrested and I really felt the brunt of the law. And I then began to resist in the courts and take it to the High Court and make it a constitutional defense. We summoned the state to justify the law, and they entirely failed to prove harms and justify criminalization. And out of that came this wonderful judgment.
Yeah. Perhaps you can just tell us a little bit more about what you refer to as how government profits from prohibition. How do they profit?
Well, it costs government to prosecute, to have police using their valuable time and the courts using their valuable time on prosecuting citizens who use cannabis. But the original prohibition in South Africa came about in 1927 as a result of the government, under orders of the British Crown, clamping down on striking miners. So it was a way to oppress workers. However, in the American situation, cannabis was made illegal so that it wouldn't compete with the burgeoning fossil carbon industry, and certain elements in the corporate oil sector, particularly Standard Oil Company, used the government structures to make it illegal. Well, they first made alcohol illegal to kill ethanol for fuel, and then in 1937, when a machine was invented to process cannabis very efficiently, it suddenly was regarded as a challenge to the existing markets in fossil carbon. Those fossil carbon interests are also the same interests in the pharmaceutical sector, the same big money. And they then, after taxing it out of the market to keep it away from the fossil carbon market, they then classified it as a drug And this then served the interests of the pharmaceutical sector because it was a very, very well-known tonic and medicine and preventative medicine for many ailments before it was made illegal.
Yeah,
and now pharmaceutical companies have profited from this resource being denied to people for their health.
All right. Okay. Good. A good understanding there of what you meant by that.
The Constitutional Court has ruled the private use of Dagga will be decriminalised.
The ruling comes after the High Court in the Western Cape ruled in March that a ban on cannabis used by adults at home was unconstitutional, effectively decriminalising it in the province. It's at the climax of a case that has pitted officials against marijuana advocates and the judiciary.
In its judgment, this court concludes that A, Section 4B of the Drugs Act is unconstitutional and therefore invalid to the extent that it prohibits the use or possession of cannabis by an adult in private for that adult's personal consumption in private.
People still out here 30 minutes after the judgment was delivered, you know, still celebrations going on. I have with me the first respondent to the matter, and he's calling this a 21-year journey. The first time he appeared in court was in the late 90s on a similar type of matter, saying, you know, this is he cannot believe this is, you know, he's finally reached this milestone. Russ Prince, thank you so much for talking to us. Can you just tell me, you were telling me 21 years later, and here you are, the highest court in the land.
16 years ago, the Constitutional Court held, a majority of the Constitutional Court held, that Rastafari is not fit and proper to be lawyers in this country. They condemned not only this applicant or this respondent to poverty, but the whole of South Africa, as Justice Albie said. Today is a vindication for the Rastafari community, for the cannabis community, as well as for myself, in the sense that I am to be given the dignity and the respect that I as a Rastafari deserve, because I am an indigenous member of this country. Rastafari is an indigenous culture of South Africa, and that we need the respect and the dignity that all other people in South Africa should get. So we are extremely thankful and joyful.
And also a message, I saw you gave a message on earlier to the community.
Yeah, because now I'm like our community, the thing that we complained about most is the fact that police had the right to arrest us for being in possession of small amounts of herb. And we are saying that the criminal law is not the appropriate way of dealing with the issue of substance abuse in South Africa. And that the fact that the cannabis laws, which was a cruel apartheid law, was still used by the liberation government of today, was simply wicked on our part. And the fact that government allowed for 18 years that the Rastafari community be down-pressed, that is a true sign and a reason why we find ourselves in this position that South Africa find themselves in currently.
And I also have with me Ms. Pepsi Lemasego. She's with the Traditional Healers Organization for South Africa, and she's just going to tell me from a traditional healers aspect. I know that Insango is something that does get used, be it Ibilis or whatever it is that you do with it. Can you just please tell me, what does this mean?
This is a landmark victory. It's serious victory. It's victory in the new year, because remember, September is a new year for Africans. You know, it's victory for a new year. It is a bonus for the Heritage Month, and it is something that tells us that you know, things are possible in South Africa. That if there was struggle for such a long time, if as healers we are struggling for such a long time to administer a plant, and today in this court we are granted permission, you know, to administer a medicine. I think that's very, very important, because it communicates to the Bill of Rights, because the Bill of Rights gives us the right, you know, to healthcare of choice. So this then tells us that we have a right to administer a form of healthcare that understands people's rights, people's culture, people's religion, and whoever thought that in South Africa today we'll be celebrating a plant. We are celebrating a plant. It is New Year for us, and we need to definitely make sure that we go in all our corners as communities to just celebrate. And for healers, they should know that from today onwards, they can administer traditional medicine as a medicine, traditional medicine in a form of a cannabis. There's nothing that can stop us now. As Rastafari is now, it means we all can have to work together, plan together, all of us, on how do we move forward? How do we develop this country economically? How do we develop this country health-wise to ensure that we provide this country with a health innovative solution in cannabis?
Jeremy David Acton, he is the leader of the Dagga Party. This party has always been calling for the legalization of Dagga use. Good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for coming through. And I suppose this, of course, is a victory for your party.
Yes, I think it is. And it's also a victory for every person out there who's a member of our culture in terms of peace of mind, and perhaps people will be able to work within the framework of the concept of privacy, to still exchange and to gift in compassion, and to gather in places where it is still a private event, where a collective private experience of cannabis may continue. You see, it's not just at home. If I carry my cannabis into a private space, which is a collective experience, then we would consume cannabis there, and just as people drink beer together.
Which is going to make it very difficult, I suppose, Jeremy, because you may have a private function at a public place, isn't it?
Yeah, well, in a public place would be questionable. There would have to be licenses for the gathering, etc., etc. But ultimately, we would like to have equality with cigarettes and alcohol users in the way we may use and gather in spaces. And if my comrade, a citizen, is smoking cigarettes and my other comrade citizen is drinking a beer, then I would like to also be with them while we cheer on our rugby team, for example, in the same social environment. And that may still be something that happens later through the lobbying that now will take place towards the new legislation.
Yeah, but do you think today's ruling sort of addressed your concerns that you would want to see the rights given to those who consume alcohol and who take tobacco the same as those who take cannabis?
Yes, I think so, because alcohol and tobacco are scientifically proven to be more damaging to society and to the individual's health than cannabis. So we should not be having more strict rules for cannabis. Yes, we have to learn how to accept this into society, but the cannabis laws cannot be stricter than alcohol and tobacco laws. No under 18 licensed premises, selling with a license perhaps in the future.
Why not?
Well, cannabis is a different culture. There's a beer culture, there's a tobacco culture, there's a vape culture, nicotine. We feel that cannabis people...
But it's a culture itself as well, isn't it?
It is a culture itself, and it's a multicultural culture in terms of all the cultural groups of South Africa and the historical backgrounds that we have in our country all know this plant, and it's a unifying tree amongst the people, actually.
But are you perhaps worried with what the Deputy Chief Justice had to say regarding the fact that Parliament will have to determine the amount of Dagga that would be considered to be not sufficient for personal use? Are you not worried because the police services and law enforcement agencies would still have to use their prerogative to determine that factor?
Well, private use also includes private medical use, not just so-called narcotic use. And when you want to make full extract cannabis oil from the plants by extraction with solvent in order to treat cancer and to consume less material for the same medical benefit, you need to actually have a large number of plants, and you need to carry on your person a large number of parcels of cannabis in order to make a small amount of cannabis oil. And cannabis oil needs to be consumed in large amounts for cancer, particularly. So,
but do you see problems with that specifically going forward?
I think ultimately it might go to court because the police think that it's too much. But I think that if average person's garden full of cannabis is not too much, and I think that carrying 5 kilograms on your person is not too much, because you may need that amount for oil.
So are you going to start working on that going forward now,
yes,
in order to persuade Parliament
Yes, well, I'm first going to work on it at home by planting my cannabis when I get home.
Okay.
And
so you don't have as it is now?
At the moment, it's not quite in the season, and I've been very busy fighting this matter.
Okay.
So the gardening hasn't happened yet.
Okay, but you've had before?
Yes,
okay.
And then the but we are not just going to lobby this government. This government has always sold out on the cannabis issue. It has always prosecuted. It took the apartheid police and dogs and helicopters and turned it onto its own growers who grew cannabis to support the struggle against apartheid. They sold out. So the Dagga Party of South Africa is calling to the young people of South Africa, this is your future, and if we, the culture, are going to sign our own legislation, then we need the young people to mobilize so that the Dagga Party may field candidates towards Parliament and we write our own legislation.
All right. No, thank you so much for coming through. If my memory serves me well with the previous elections, your party was not registered. Are you registered?
We are nationally registered, but we didn't manage to raise the exorbitant deposit that is required to participate. We're expecting to have to crowdsource very fast in order to move to Parliament after this judgment.
All right, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming through. Many thanks to Jeremy David Acton. He's the leader of the Dagga Party, of course, giving their reaction to the Constitutional Court ruling.
From my side and from the Cannabis Club, from the CannaClub side, I just would like to say massive respect to you guys.
Thanks. Big thank you. Thank you for what you've meant to the South African